When you design a plastic part, you're not just shaping geometry, you're shaping how it fills, cools, warps, and ultimately performs in the real world. The part designer is particularly interested in validating their design to understand how the part is going to look and perform in the desired application. For plastic molding, this includes understanding potential surface defects, gating possibilities, and the impact of thickness variation. Welcome to the Part Designer's Guide to Using Moldex3D, your practical roadmap to designing smarter, manufacturable plastic parts using simulation. I'm Alex Baker, and whether you're new to simulation or looking to integrate Moldex3D into your daily design workflow, this guide will help you move from reactive problem solving to proactive design optimization. When we run a simulation for part design validation, usually we're going to have a setup that looks something like this. We'll have the part that we intend on molding, and then we have a gate location where we will allow the plastic to enter the part and flow through the geometry. The first result that we can look at is the progression of the plastic flow through the part. I'll go to the filling results and melt front time, and this will allow me to visualize how long it took for the material to get to each location on the part, the time indicated by the scale over on the right side. I can go to the Result tab and press the play button to play the animation of the flow progression. And one of the most important initial questions that we need to ask ourselves is whether the part has actually filled 100%. If we get a short shot in the analysis, it really isn't worth looking at any of the other results. So I'm going to go to the log file and then filling to see whether my part has filled 100%. In the log file, I'll go all the way down to the bottom of the computation table here, where hopefully I've reached 100% fill. This is a very conclusive way to figure out if the part has filled completely. If the part has not filled completely, then you'll get a message log down here that will tell you why the short shot occurred, and will also give you some troubleshooting steps as to what you can do to remedy the short shot that has occurred. The next question that we need to ask is whether the flow is balanced or not. The gate location that we choose is not only important for how the plastic is going to flow through the geometry, but also for how the part is going to perform in the intended application. In this case, I put my gate central to the part geometry so that the flow radiates outwards from the center to the end of fill. Ultimately, I want these end of fill regions to fill out at relatively the same time. This was what we call flow balance. Now I can eliminate the need for the discussion around flow balance by just putting the gate on one side of my part. For example, if I put the gate over in this region, the plastic can only flow in one direction. And so the end of fill over here would be the only one in the part. However, something that we have to consider is how much pressure is required to make this part. A longer flow length will cause the pressure requirement to make this part increase dramatically, and therefore we want to minimize the flow length as much as possible. So putting the gate central to the part geometry can help to optimize the amount of pressure required to make this part. In addition, putting the gate central to the part will allow me to pack out the part more uniformly when we get into the packing stage of the plastic molding process. I'm going to be applying pressure from this gate location, and the amount of packing that occurs is going to be dependent on how molten the material is during the packing stage. If I begin my flow over here, I'm going to have fresh material continually coming into my geometry on this side of my part, but as the material flows, it will theoretically cool down, and therefore the material will freeze much faster at the end of fill. Therefore, my packing effect will be much more concentrated around the gate location. I'll get a very high amount of property variation and therefore a higher tendency for the part to warp and become dimensionally unstable after the molding process is completed. To determine if the flow is balanced across my part, I can go down to the XY curve sprue pressure. And here, what I want to see is that all of my primary end of fills are unfilled at the VP switch point. The VP switch point on the sprue pressure curve is going to be the maximum point here. And so I can actually back up my animation. You can see this dotted line kind of moves across the curve. I can move my animation so that the dotted line is right on that peak. You can also understand where your switchover pressure is if you go into your process condition, or you can look at the information tab here. In this case, I used a 98% by volume filled, Right now, my percentage is by time percent, so I'm going to switch that to by volume percent. And I'll go to 98% volume fill. You'll see that the dotted line is now directly on that PP switch point. At this point, I should see that all of my end of fills are unfilled on my part geometry, and in this case, they certainly are. This would indicate that my flow is balanced. Now, a moment ago, we mentioned that putting the gate central to the part geometry allows us to minimize the amount of pressure to make this part. But in addition to that, balancing the flow across your geometry allows you to eliminate the existence of pressure spikes. Pressure spikes will happen whenever one side of the part fills faster than the other, and in that case, a momentum shift will happen to force the material to flow in the opposite direction that it normally was, kind of like water hitting a wall and rebounding, and you see the wave kind of propagate in the opposite direction. In this case, we actually do have a small pressure spike right in the middle of the curve. So I can move my animation back to just before that happens and understand what actually might be occurring at this moment to cause this little pressure anomaly. If I rotate my part around, I might be able to actually see what's happening at this particular moment. We can see that this back corner is actually filling out. Now, theoretically, I would want to balance this with the other two end of fills, but because of how the geometry is laid out, I can't really balance that back corner. This is just something that we'll have to live with, but it's something that we should understand nonetheless. The next question that we want to ask ourselves is, where are the weld lines on the part geometry? And ultimately, how critical are those weld lines to both the aesthetic properties and the mechanical strength of the final molded part? Now, I can show the weld lines directly, but usually I like to overlay the weld lines onto the melt front time. So I'm going to go to melt front time, display, weld line. That will allow me to just overlay these weld lines onto the melt front progression. And then I can just use the melt front progression itself to understand how those melt fronts are coming together. Here, here, and then down here on the bottom one. This allows us to just understand where those weld lines are occurring around a feature. We can't really eliminate the existence of a weld line, but we can manipulate where that weld line occurs on a particular feature. So for this one over here, we can see that the weld line occurs kind of right on the side of this. There's a higher potential for it to show on the surface of the part, whereas if we were to move it into one of these corners, it might not show as obviously. However, if I move it into one of these corners, then I might reduce the mechanical strength of the part much more because the weld line would be in a stress concentration that would already be a little bit weaker. This is kind of like what's happening over on the other side of the part, where we have a weld line occurring on that corner, close to that corner. And so it might be less likely to show on the surface of the part, but it's in that stress concentration. We can shift this gate location across the surface to manipulate where those weld lines will occur around these features. In addition to visualizing the weld lines, we can also look at the relative strength and visual properties of these weld lines. I can go to the weld line meeting angle, and this will represent how the melt fronts came together. The weld line meeting angle is a representation of how the melt fronts came together, and the relative strength of a weld line is going to be dependent on the ability of the polymer chains on either melt front to mix together, to physically entangle with one another. If the melt fronts just come up one to one another head on, that would be a 0-degree weld line. And in that case, the polymer chains will not entangle with one another, they'll just bond and freeze, which will be a very weak interaction and will be easy to break in the final molded part. However, if the melt fronts are moving together as one, the weld line angle will gradually increase until it becomes a meld line, in which case we would no longer see it visually on the surface of the part in Moldex3D. The barrier for this is 145 degrees, and so on the results of Moldex3D, in weld line meeting angle, you'll see the maximum value is 145 degrees, at which point we would no longer see the weld line progression. The smaller the weld line meeting angle, the weaker the weld line is going to be because of that lack of interaction between the two melt fronts. As the melt front progresses after the weld line is formed, the angle gradually increases, and the polymer chains on either melt front are able to entangle with one another a little bit easier, making the weld line a little bit stronger. So the initial meeting point usually is the weakest point on the weld line, and as the melt front progresses past the weld line, that angle gradually increases and the strength increases accordingly. The other indicator for us is going to be weld line temperature. Weld line temperature is more of an aesthetic property. A colder weld line is more likely to show on the surface of the part. A hotter weld line is less likely to show. And the reason for this is actually very similar to the mechanic that I just mentioned in the weld line meeting angle. If the temperature of the melt is hotter, the polymer chains are vibrating a little bit faster and are able to traverse that boundary a little bit easier. If the polymer chains are able to traverse that boundary, then it's less likely that the weld line barrier is going to show on the surface of the geometry after the part has been molded. In this case, we can see that the weld line temperature of this weld line over here is around 299 degrees. This one here is around 299 degrees, very similar to one another. This one down here is a little bit colder, being a little bit further down the length of flow. And so we can use this as a relative indicator to understand which of these weld lines are more likely to show on the surface than others. But it is important to know the context of how these compare to the melt temperature. If I go to my information tree again, I can see that the melt temperature here was 300 C, and so therefore the weld line temperature has only varied by 2 degrees over the entirety of the geometry. The next aesthetic quality that we'd be interested in is the potential for air entrapment in the part geometry. Air traps can either be caused by a melt front wrapping around a certain feature. Like in the case on the left side, you can see the thickness around the outside is much higher than the 9 windows, and therefore there's an air bubble that's created. That air will not be able to escape the mold and gets trapped. Another type of air trap will happen if the air is not able to escape the mold at the end of fill. In this case, all of the pressure being applied to the melt front will cause this air to compress and superheat, and this can actually cause a burn mark on the part surface. Both of these effects can be visualized using simulation. The primary result that we use for this is the air zone volume. Air zone volume represents the negative of the melt front, and if we see all zeros over here on the right side, that's actually just an indication that the part is completely filled, and therefore there is no air in the part geometry after the molding is completed. Because this represents how the air is vacating the mold, if I play my animation, instead of seeing how the plastic is flowing through the part, I'm actually just seeing how the air is being pushed out of the mold. This allows us to see how the air pockets are formed and where these air pockets are broken from one another. At this moment in time, we can actually see that this air pocket has broken from this one. And so therefore, if there's no way to vent the air out of the mold from this air pocket, the air will be trapped in the mold and can potentially burn the material if it's compressed too much. If I continue my air front progression here, we can really start to see where these air pockets are formed on the geometry. And we can start to understand where venting will be necessary in the mold. And so it is important to understand what the thickness distribution looks like. In this case, we have a thick wall over here, and then we have a pretty nominal wall throughout the rest of the part. I can understand this thickness distribution by just modifying my scale a little bit. In this case, the thick wall is about 3 millimeters. The nominal wall appears at about 2.5 millimeters. And then the thinnest wall, maybe somewhere, it looks like it just tapers down. I can get a more precise representation of that thickness profile by placing probes. The probe tool allows us to place point objects that allow us to measure the current result item at those locations. So if I place 3 probes on my part surface, I can go to display, probe, value, to understand what the thicknesses are at those 3 different locations. And we can see those 3 thicknesses represented here. But the thickness distribution can not only allow us to understand the potential for air entrapment, but it can also allow us to understand the potential for hesitation in race tracking. Actually, an internal air trap, like we saw earlier, is caused by a phenomenon called race tracking, where the melt front experiences a thin feature and flows around it because the plastic will take the path of least resistance, and only once the material is filled out the rest of the part will it go back and fill in the thinner features. In this case, we just have a simple example of a 3 millimeter plaque with a 1 millimeter feature on the side here. As the material begins flowing, it will take the path of least resistance, and even after filling this out a little bit, the material will continue filling in the thicker region, and it's only once the material gets to the end of this thicker region where it tries to fill out this thinner feature. By that point, the material has frozen off. But even if the material was able to move forward, it may have frozen partially, and you could get a flow mark on the surface of the part because of the material freezing and then moving. That will cause a difference in aesthetic quality. So we need to understand how the thickness variation is going to impact the flow distribution across the geometry. Usually, we can visualize this with the melt front time result by just playing the animation, but there is another way to visualize this, and that is by using an ISO contour. The ISO contour will allow us to put multiple ISO lines, kind of like an elevation map, except instead of elevation here, we're looking at time. And so where these lines get really close together, it indicates that the melt took a long time to get across that feature. In this case, we could expect that thick feature to cause the melt front to move a little bit easier across this part of the geometry, but actually we don't see the relative distance between the lines increase too much. And in the nominal region, the distance between the lines doesn't change that much either. In this case, I would say that there is no significant leading or hesitation effects, but if you do have a high amount of thickness variation, then this could be a problem that you need to address in the part design. When we run a warpage analysis in Moldex3D, you're able to see how the part is going to deform after the molding process is completed. This warpage analysis takes the part all the way down to room temperature, and so is a representation of the part after it is completely cooled. I can use the deformation function to understand how the part is going to visually deform, and I can scale this warpage to visualize what areas of the part are going to be more prone to warping than others. We can see this wall collapsing inwards, and we can see the different features on our part deforming in different ways. There's multiple factors that go into the warpage, and so I encourage you to look at this video that goes more into the different factors of warpage and how this can be interpreted in a more streamlined and consistent manner. Thank you for watching the Part Designer's Guide to using Moldex3D. If there's any videos that you'd like to see covered in the future, you can leave a comment below, like the video on your way out, and you can subscribe to the Moldex3D North America YouTube channel to be notified of when videos get posted in the future. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.